So let's get ready to learn more about this practical principle as Pastor Dave teaches on mentorship.
Hey, for those of you who have a high school student who's at the Life Trip, they come back tomorrow night, not today, for those of you who got really nervous there at the opening. They'll be back tomorrow. Hey, in 1996, when I graduated from Cornell High School, you got real impressed there for a second, didn't you? I went to Cornell High School. I graduated. I had no idea what I wanted to do the rest of my life. Was kind of clueless. I decided to go to a small Christian college that was about 45, 50 minutes north of Pittsburgh. And I got there, had no idea what I wanted to major in. I mean, I was clueless. So I decided to major in communications because I figure everybody needs to communicate in their job, right? So I took communications. Halfway through my senior year, I had no idea what I was going to do. I had an internship that summer, which was not a very good experience. And I'll never forget this one certain day. I think it was right around December, beginning of December of the year 1999. And it was called Senior Saturday. So all the college seniors would show up in this building, and we would go to different classrooms, and we would meet with potential employers, or we would meet with people that would talk about potential careers. And I checked out a couple of them. But I remember being so discouraged because I was like, man, I don't know what I want to do, and I'm going to graduate in a few months, and I'm going to make this communication major, and what do you do with a major in communications? I don't know. And so I had this, I was walking down the hallway, and in one of the classrooms sat a man whose name is Rich Grassel, and I had never spoken to him before. He was the head of the youth ministry department there. He had mentored many of my friends. And I stood outside this classroom, and I had what was sort of a Mount Horeb moment. I'll describe what I mean by that in a few minutes. But I felt God kind of say to me, however that works, whether it's in your conscience or you just kind of feel like God's speaking to you, to walk into the room and to speak to Rich Grassel about going into ministry. And I hadn't really spent much time thinking about ministry. So I walk into this room, and I say, hey, Rich, I think I want to do youth ministry as a career. And he's like, okay, so what year are you? And I was like, well, I'm a senior, and I'm about to graduate. And he's like, oh, well, good timing, right? And so he actually had extraordinary amount of patience with me. He got me in a couple of classes. He hooked me up with a guy who did youth ministry so I could serve in the next several months, mostly moving transparencies, so that, there's transparencies that you'd move when you would sing worship songs. And then he got me an internship in Atlanta, Georgia, doing youth ministry. Had no experience, but I felt like God might be calling me into this, that he might be asking me to go into ministry. So I gave it a shot, did the whole internship, had a good experience, and served for the next 6 years in youth ministry. And all during those 6 years, Rich served as a mentor of mine. I met with him all the time. He would meet me for meals. I would call him on the phone. He would lead a small group of other youth pastors who would get together from time to time with him. And I'm telling you, he literally changed the trajectory of my life, and I don't know what I would do without him. He walked me through when I said, I think I want to become like an adult pastor, or like a senior pastor at a church. And he got me hooked up with the Christian Missionary Alliance. This is the denomination we're in. And so quite literally, I probably would not even be here at this church if it were not for the impact that Rich Grassel made in my life. And, I have not spoken to him in 10 years since I moved here. And I even texted him yesterday to say, hey, thanks for the impact you made in my life, but he didn't get back. So I think he probably got a different phone number. I don't even know how to get a hold of him anymore. But for those, 6 or 7 years, he literally changed my life with his investment in me. So I want to talk to you today about the power of mentoring. But before I get into the Bible text today, I want to have a fun little trivia game, okay? So on the screen, I'm going to show you the picture of a mentor, And then if you know who that person mentored, just shout it out as loud as you can. Whoever gets the most gets a high five or something like that. So this anybody know who that is? It's not Santa with a toga. That, of course, is Socrates. Socrates mentored who? Plato. Good job, Plato. I'm impressed. Yoda mentored Luke Skywalker, and really, in many ways, he's mentored all of us, right? We've all been a beneficiary of Yoda's wisdom. How about this? Maya Angelou mentored Oprah Winfrey. This guy right here, Colonel Sanders, did you know that he mentored who? Did somebody say chicken? No, he killed chickens. He didn't mentor chickens. He mentored Dave Thomas, right? So when you go to Wendy's, you can thank KFC for Wendy's. We should all go to KFC afterwards just to celebrate the greatness of Colonel Sanders. How about Mr. Miyagi? He mentored Danielson or Daniel LaRusso. How about Mufasa? Simba, he mentored, of course, Simba. So there's so many examples of people who mentored others and literally changed the trajectory of our lives. And so today we're going to look at truly one of the most spectacular narratives in the entire Old Testament. It's big, it's long, it's amazing, and it is so, so powerful. And there's so much we can learn from the story of Elijah, who mentored Elisha. I always thought, like, God, could you have given this guy a different name so that we couldn't get Elijah and Elisha confused? I'll probably get them confused today. But anyway, Elijah mentored Elisha. And their story can be found in 1 Kings chapter 17 through 2 Kings chapter 13 in about 875 to 797 BC. These were two of Israel's greatest prophets. The prophets were simply people whom God specifically chose to be his mouthpiece. So they would go up to mostly kings to say, this is what God wants you to do. Thus saith the Lord. And there's so much, we could spend all day talking about the actions and the movements of Elijah and Elisha, but I'm kind of going to take the highlights of it as we really dive into the power of God and the power of mentorship. So we are first introduced to Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 17, where Elijah, who's chosen by God to be his mouthpiece, goes up to King Ahab, who is one of the most evil kings in Israelite history. He had a wife named Jezebel who fed 850 prophets, these pagan prophets, whom she would take care of. She would, I guess, kind of mentor them in hopes that they would pray to the god Baal, and Baal would send the rain so that they would have crops. Baal was in charge of fertility, both crops as well as children. And so Elijah goes up to Ahab one day, and this is the very first thing that is recorded in Scripture. He says to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. That's the first thing he says. Apparently, Elijah did not read Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? Because this is the first thing he says. Like, you're not doing a good job of leading Israel. You have led them astray to worshiping Baal, and now you're going to pay. You think that it's Baal that's going to send the rain? Well, I'm telling you, the one true God is going to withhold the rain for years. And then Elijah leaves, he takes off, he goes to this place called Kireth, where he hangs out by the brook, and the ravens fed him and took care of him. And then he meets this woman who is known as the widow at Zarephath. And this is an extraordinary moment. Elijah comes up to this widow, and he says to her, hey, can you make me a little cake? Can you make me some food? And the widow's like, my paraphrase, no, I can't make, there hasn't been rain in years, and all I have is a handful of flour and a little bit of oil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect a bunch of sticks. I'm going to make a fire, and then I'm going to take my little bit of flour and a little bit of oil. I'm going to make a cake. My son and I are going to eat this. It's like a little Debbie's cake, right? And we're going to eat it, and then we're going to die. And Elijah's like, okay, I want you to feed me first. And she's like, okay, maybe I didn't make myself clear. Like, I don't have much. Barely enough. We're only going to live for like a little bit longer, and then we're going to die of either dehydration or starvation. Elijah's like, just do it. So she obeys him, this amazing act of obedience, makes Elijah some food, and then the oil and the water and the flour, they just keep on coming. Miraculously multiplies it. She's able to feed herself and her family and Elijah for a long period of time. So God uses Elijah to do this amazing miracle. And then it's time for Elijah to go back and meet with King Ahab. So the text tells us Ahab went to meet with Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you troubler of Israel?" In other words, we haven't had rain for years, and it's all your fault. And Elijah's like, "It's not my fault, it's your fault." This is exactly what it says. "I've not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." So, Ahab, this is what I want you to do. I want you to summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel. And bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So Ahab takes him up on this offer, and he sent word throughout all of Israel, and he assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. And Elijah went before the people and said, ... Now, I love great speeches. Right? Last week, we looked at one of the greatest American speeches of all time, the Gettysburg Address. 272 words, 2 minutes, permanent marker on our nation. This is a permanent mark type speech. This is like, Braveheart, where he's got his face painted blue. He's like, "They can take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom." And everyone's like, "Yeah." And then they charge the hill and they win the victory. So he gets in front of, and I imagine he's got at least 850 pagan prophets, and then probably hundreds, maybe thousands of Israelites who have gathered together on Mount Carmel, and he's about to give them an amazing speech. And this speech is only 22 words, but this is big time. Here's what he says. Again, it's kind of like, maybe there's a stadium there, so they can all see him. Or maybe it's just he's shouting it as loud as he can. He says to the people, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." Who's it going to be? Choose this day whom you're going to serve. Are you going to serve God, or are you going to serve Baal? Now, typically, in ancient Israel, they didn't completely say, "Well, I don't believe in God anymore. I'm not going to serve him." What they would do is they would mix a little bit of Baal in with God just in case God didn't come through. So if God doesn't answer my prayers, let me ask Baal, and maybe he'll answer my prayers and send rain and give us children. And Elijah on Mount Carmel that day says, "Oh no, you can't have one foot with God and one foot with Baal. You got to make a decision. Is it going to be Baal or is it going to be God?" And you might expect everyone to say, "We're going to be on your side, Elijah. We're serving God." But instead, after he gives this amazing speech, the people said nothing. And he's like, "Okay, I guess that wasn't a very effective speech. Now I guess I got to put on a show." He's going to display something miraculous. So Elijah calls together all these prophets. There's 850 of them, right? And he says, "All right, we're going to show these people who's God." So he's got 2 bulls in front of him. He says, "Pick your bull." So the 850 prophets pick one bull. And he says, "We're going to put the bull on the altar, and you pray to your God, and we'll see if God lights it on fire, and we'll pray to my God, and we'll see which God is real." So they take the bull, they cut it up in pieces, they put it on the altar, and they start praying. And they're praying louder. And they're praying for hours. And this goes on until lunchtime. And Elijah's just kind of sitting in the corner laughing. And then he starts smack talking. And he's like, this is exactly what he says to the prophets. "Why don't you shout louder? I mean, surely your God Baal is a god. Perhaps he's deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened." So they dance a little more. And then they start to slash themselves, which is this ancient custom. If I shed blood, maybe that'll really get the attention of the gods. They do it all the way past dinner time, and nothing happens. And Elijah's like, "All right, step aside." So he takes the bull and he chops it up, puts it on the fire. And then he gets a bunch of water. And they're like, "Where'd you get that water? I mean, It hasn't rained in years. Where'd the water come from? I don't know where the water come from, but when he's pouring it on top of the bulls, everyone's like, oh my goodness, we could have used that water for food. Anyway, he's pouring the water on top of this sacrifice, soaking it. And then Elijah says, answer me, O Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again, because their hearts have drifted. Their hearts have drifted to follow this pagan, fake God. And then in this awesome display of God's power, the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. And as you can imagine, thousands, hundreds, probably thousands of people, they saw it. And they fell prostrate, and they cried, the Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God. This is what we call a mountaintop experience. Now, if you've been walking with Jesus for years, maybe decades, maybe you grew up in the church or you've been around the church for years, you've probably had a mountaintop experience. Probably not like this, right? This epic, amazing moment. But you've probably had moments in your life where you can point back and say, God did something great in my life during this season. I experienced God's goodness. I experienced his power. You know, maybe you went on a conference like the Life Trip. Maybe God used you in an amazing way. Maybe God answered a prayer that you've been praying for years. And you would say that was a mountaintop experience. I experienced God's power. But here's the thing about mountaintop experiences. They're often followed by the valley. If they weren't followed by the valley, it would cease to become a mountaintop experience. It would just become a plateau, because you'd always be on the mountain and everything would just be great and wonderful and awesome. And after a while, it would just sort of become normal. But isn't this kind of the way life works? Is, again, if you're a Christian, you've been walking with the Lord for a while, you experience the highs and then you experience the lows, and that's just kind of part of life. Like, you've got, some of you have high school kids that are at the Life Trip right now. I'm getting text messages from some of the leaders, and they're like, this is awesome. Everybody's worshiping, and it's powerful. They're having a mountaintop experience. And when they get back home tomorrow night, and maybe for the next couple of days, you as a parent are going to look at your kid and be like, wow, God did a great work in their life. And then 3 or 4 days later, you're going to start to get frustrated with your teenager. And you're going to be like, I thought you went to Life, and I thought your life was going to be transformed. How many times do I have to ask you to take out the trash? Because it's just natural to have a mountaintop experience and then to come back down into the valley and to experience a low, right? That's just part of life. This is exactly what happens with Elijah. Mountaintop experience, and now he goes down to the valley, because he discovers that Jezebel is mad, with a capital M, that he had just killed all 850 of her pagan prophets whom she's mentored and given food and, supported. And she's like, I'm going to get him. I'm going to take his life. When I found that Elijah, and so we find out that Elijah was so afraid of Jezebel, even after experiencing the power of God, that Elijah ran for his life. And so he takes off. And the text tells us that while he himself went on a day's journey into the desert, he came to a broom tree, he sat down under it, and he prayed that he might die. This is depression, right? This is anxiety. This is a moment of in the valley of the shadow of death. And he says, I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. And this wasn't like, take my life and let it be concert. This is like, I don't want to live anymore. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. And then he lay down under the tree and he fell asleep. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought to yourself, I don't want to live anymore. Maybe some of you have been there. You've been so low that it's like, I don't even want to live anymore. Maybe some of you have tried to take, we've heard testimonies from this stage before about people who have thought about taking their own lives. And that is, for some of us, the part of the human experience. And this is what Elijah is going through. He is in the valley of the shadow of death. 150 years earlier, David had written that one psalm where he says, I'm in the valley of the shadow of death, but your rod and your staff, they comfort me, and you've prepared a table in the presence of my enemies. And even though I'm in the valley of the shadow of death, God is with me. This is not Elijah. He's like, I'm in the valley of the shadow of death, and I don't feel God, and I just want to die. And what's amazing about this experience is that God meets him in the valley, right? And he gives him food, and he refreshes, he restores his soul. And then the text tells us that he got up and he drank and he was strengthened by that food, and he traveled 40 days and 40 nights. There's a lot of biblical imagery when it comes to 40 days and 40 nights. Like Jesus was in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. The Israelites were in the wilderness for 40 years. And after being in the wilderness for 40 days, 40 nights, he comes to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, which reminds us of Moses when he went to Mount Sinai, which is also called Mount Horeb. And he has this amazing, amazing experience on Mount Horeb, right? And he goes up to Mount Horeb, and God, after refreshing him and restoring him, and presumably after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, God gives him a call, and here is his call. This is awesome. I want you, Elijah, to anoint Elisha to succeed you as prophet. That's what I want you to do. That's your task. You have experienced a lot. And now your biggest assignment yet is to anoint your successor, to mentor this man whom I've called. So, if you're watching online right now and you've been shopping on Amazon, or if you're in the room and you've kind of drifted a little bit, I want to give you just a quick summary in visual form of the roller coaster that Elijah has been on so far, right? He starts out speaking this hard truth. There's not going to be any rain. And then he has the flour and the oil miracle with the widow at Zarephath, which is a pretty good mountaintop experience. And the mountaintop gets even better because he actually raises her son from the dead. And then he gets to Mount Carmel, where he has this amazing interaction with the power of God. And then he runs for his life, and then he prays for his death. And then God refreshes him. And I would argue that the highest point of his life is when he's called to mentor Elisha. Because God's like, all right, now that you've experienced the highs and the lows, you're ready to mentor somebody. And here's what I want to communicate with you this morning. That when you, especially those of you who've been walking with the Lord for years, it is good to experience the mountaintops. And it's also good to experience the valleys, because God's sharpening you, right? And he's rounding you out so that you can mentor somebody else. And I'm telling you, what I want in a mentor is not somebody who's only experienced the mountaintops. I want to know that that person has also experienced the valleys so that he can relate with some of the struggles that I've been in. So this is my challenge for you. This is my challenge. If you've been walking with the Lord for years, I want to challenge you to mentor somebody. Could this be, this moment right now, could this be your Mount Horeb moment? And not everybody's ready to be a mentor, right? Some of you are not ready to be a mentor, but everybody's ready to be mentored. I mean, I refer to that moment when I was in that senior Saturday seminar, and I was standing outside of Rich Grassel's office. And that was a Mount Horeb moment to me, where I was like, I'm just going to go in and see what happens. And it changed my life. So maybe this is sort of a Mount Horeb moment where you think to yourself, is God asking you to go seek a mentor? Is God asking you to go mentor somebody? Don't let the valleys that you've experienced go to waste. Allow God to use those valley experiences for someone else's benefit. So here's the extraordinary story of Elijah and Elisha. Here's what the text tells us in 1 Kings 19. Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. So Elisha is running the family business, right? He's got all these oxen. They're plowing the ground. He's a farmer. This is what he has to look at every single day. He's looking at the rear of a bunch of oxen, plowing, doing hard work every day. Those of you who do manual labor, You're getting your hands dirty. I've always been inspired by people who do manual labor and just work hard every day. Here's the thing. You may think your job is mundane right now, but you keep on working hard as unto the Lord. You never know when God's going to show up to give you a message. So here he is. He's working hard, right? He's looking at this, and here's what we discover. God's with us. God speaks to us at the top, speaks to us in the valley, and he speaks to us in the rear, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to make Elisha the butt of my joke there. Thank you for that. So anyway, here he is. He's working in the field. And Elijah gets this word from God, and here's what he does. He went up to him, and he threw his cloak around him, which in those days meant, come follow me. Like, drop your nets, Jesus said to his disciples, come follow me. So he puts the cloak around him, and then Elijah takes off, just walks away. Elijah could have said to Elisha, hey, I met with God on the mountaintop, and he told me, thus saith the Lord, you're supposed to come follow me. But he doesn't. He gives him a choice. Puts the cloak on him, takes off, and the text tells us that Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. And then he says to him, let me kiss my father and my mother goodbye, and then I will come with you. And Elijah says, go back, what have I done to you? Now this isn't, oh my goodness, what have I done to you? This is, you go back, and when you hang out with your family and your friends, you're going to be tempted to stick with the family business. But I'm asking you to leave it all behind and to come follow me. So this is what Elisha did. This is incredible. Elisha left him, and he went back. And he took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat, and he gave it to the people, and they ate. He dropped his nets. He killed the cow, and he burned the plow. And he said, you know what? I love my family. I love my friends, and I'm going to make them a feast as sort of my going out party. I'm leaving it all, and I'm following this man. And I don't know exactly where he's going, but I believe that God is in this. And so he set out to follow Elijah, and he became his attendant. I think this is true, that Elijah's greatest legacy would be his attendant, not his attendance. And what I mean by that is he had a big attendance on Mount Carmel, right? He had a lot of people that watched the power of God, but that was not his greatest legacy. His greatest legacy was Elisha. Now, isn't it true that here in America, we love big things. Bigger is always better. More is always best, right? And we love, and these are good things. We keep track of attendance so that we can plan. We want to reach more people. Attendance is not a bad thing, right? But we love when things are bigger and better, right? We love more horsepower, more money, more years and money for retirement, more friends, more influence, more toys, more square footage, and more acres. These are not bad things, but they can very easily become an idol. They can become the focus of our lives, and we start to think to ourselves, what am I leaving behind? Instead of the question that we should be asking ourselves, which is this: who's your legacy? Who's your legacy? Who are you pouring into? Not what are you leaving behind? And Elijah knew this. And Elijah spent, most scholars think that he spent about 6 years mentoring Elisha. And after about 6 years, it came time for, and this story is just, it's a grand narrative, right? It's just extraordinary. One day, can you imagine, here's Elijah with Elisha following him. And Elijah goes up to heaven in a fiery chariot. And here's Elisha, who had just spent 6 years with his spiritual father, with his mentor. He looks at him going up to heaven in a chariot, and he says, my father. He's not like, oh my goodness, finally he's gone and I can do my, this is his spiritual father whom he loves, right? And he's weeping. And then he took hold of his own clothes and he tore them apart, because in ancient Israel, that's what you would do when you experienced suffering or when you wanted to lament over something. He tears his clothes because his spiritual father has just gone to heaven. And so Elijah, as he's on his way up to heaven, he takes his cloak off again. And this time he doesn't take it back. He drops it down on the ground. And Elisha picks up the cloak that had fallen from Elijah, and he went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. And he takes the cloak, he places it into the Jordan River, and the Jordan River parts. Right? Just like when the Israelites crossed the Jordan and went into the Promised Land. Just like Jesus being baptized in the Jordan to inaugurate his ministry. All kind of awesome things happen in Jordan. It parts the water, and there's 50 Israelite prophets who are watching this, and they say, the spirit of Elijah has rested on Elisha. God is with him. And right before that, Elisha asks Elijah for a double portion of his spirit. I mean, you talk about boldness. And when you read the rest of the account of Elisha, you should go home and read it today. It's amazing. It's great reading. It's fascinating. It's powerful. You discover that Elisha's ministry exceeds that of Elijah's. You can read many of these accounts, most of them in 2 Kings chapter 2 through 6. And we discover that Elisha multiplies a widow's oil and resurrects her son. And you're like, oh, he's going to do the exact same thing as Elijah. But he doesn't. He does actually a lot more than Elijah does. His ministry looks a little bit different. Elijah's ministry was more like, turn from your sin, follow God, depart from Baal worship. He was like all about truth. Get rid of the evil among you. Whereas Elisha was definitely about truth as well, but was more about grace, right? You've heard that Jesus was referred to as a man that was full of truth and grace. Most of us aren't full of truth and grace. Most of us either, kind of side with, we're like truth, and some of us are like more grace, and we kind of take one side or the other. Elijah was more truth. Elisha was a little bit more grace and a little bit more compassionate. And you read all these amazing compassionate things that Elisha does. For example, he purifies poisonous stew so a bunch of guys can have a meal. He multiplies some loaves of bread to feed 100 really hungry people. There's one man named Naaman who's a Syrian general, and he's covered with leprosy. And Elisha heals him by saying, go into the Jordan River, and dipping down 7 times, and then you'll be healed. And then one of my favorite stories is just so like normal, and not normal, sorry, none of us have ever done this, but it seems like a small thing, like why would you do here's what happens. One day there's this guy out in the woods, and he's cutting down trees, just a normal thing. But it's not his own axe. He borrowed his axe from somebody else. He's cutting down a tree, and the axe head falls off the handle and goes into the river. And he's like, oh no, now this guy's not going to want to be my friend anymore because I just borrowed his tool, and the axe head's now at the bottom of the river. And Elisha's like, no problem. So he goes over, he sticks a little piece of wood in the thing, and then the axe head floats up. He's like, there's your axe head. He's like, wow, that's awesome. And now he's got a new axe head, right? Elisha did so many miracles. It's possible that other than Jesus, Elisha did the most miracles in the entire New Testament, though you could argue that Peter and some of the New Testament apostles did many as well. He was such a powerful man, was so used by God. This is amazing, that one day, this is the very last thing we read about Elisha in the scriptures, that one day, while some Israelites were burying a man, suddenly they saw a band of raiders, so they threw the man's body into Elisha's tomb. And when the body touched Elisha's bones, the man came to life and stood up on his feet. That is how powerful Elisha was. So, here's the question I want to leave you with. It's actually 2 questions. The first question is, do you have a Christian mentor? Now, some of you might have a mentor at work who's showing you how to do your job, and that's great. But I'm talking about something different here. I'm talking about having somebody who can meet with you to pour into you, who can mentor you? Do you have a Christian mentor? And if the answer to that is no, which I suspect is most of us, I want to challenge you to pray for one and to ask our staff if we can hook you up with a mentor. I was meeting with someone recently. She's like in her mid-30s, and she's like, I need a mentor. I need somebody I can look up to. I need someone that can pray with me. And I was like, I know somebody. So I called her up. She prayed about it. She's like, yes, I'll do it. And they're going to meet this afternoon. If you want a mentor, we will do the very best we can, because there are so many people in this church who have been walking with Jesus for years that should serve as a mentor. So do you have a mentor? If the answer is no, you should find one. You should find one. And the second question is, are you intentionally mentoring someone? Now, this might not be for everyone, but it should be for those of us who've been walking with the Lord for a while. You should be intentionally mentoring someone. Now, if the answer to this question is no, I'll tell you why you're not currently mentoring somebody. It's 3 reasons in my mind. Number 1, it's because you don't think you're cool enough, right? You're like, I don't know if I have much to offer this person. I'm not sure I'm cool enough. And here's the truth. Here's the truth. Your coolness may not translate to everyone, but it's likely that it will translate to someone. In other words, not everybody's going to think you're cool, but somebody will think you're cool, because chances are there's somebody else who's got the same gifts and the same passions as you do. So you don't need to be cool to everyone, but you're probably cool to someone. And what a shame if you just allow all those valley experiences and those mountaintop experiences to not be passed on to somebody else. The second reason that I think that many of you will walk out of this room today and you'll say, wow, that was a really cool story about Elijah and Elisha. Thanks for that sermon, but you won't do anything about it. The reason? Well, let me just kind of quote Nancy DeMoss Wolgemuth, who wrote a book called Adorned. 7 ladies during the growth group season talked about this whole mentoring principle. Here's what she says. If you're too busy to do this, to commit to even a single mentoring relationship, either as the older or younger person, perhaps you need to ask yourself if you're too busy with less important things. Because isn't that true? That we get distracted by less important things, those things that I had listed here, the what instead of the who. If you're a Jesus follower, this isn't even an option. I mean, the last thing he told his disciples was, go and make disciples of all the nations. And disciple making is best done in the context of a mentor-mentee relationship. Like this right here, where I'm out here preaching to y'all, is nice. And if all you ever do is listen to sermons or listen to podcasts or read books, that is good and that is important, but it is not as important or life-changing as mentorship is. And you know that because some of you experience the power, the real power of a mentor relationship. So go and make disciples and do it intentionally. Don't just hope that it happens. I mean, Jesus told us to be salt and light, to go out and live out the truths of the gospel and sort of hope that people see something different about us. That's like level 1, but level 2 is intentional disciple making. So Jesus says, go and make disciples, and here's the promise, that surely I am with you always to the very end of the earth. I know this seems weird to imagine, but the same Spirit that worked in the lives of Elijah and Elisha lives in you. You may not do Mount Carmel exploits, and you may not raise people from the dead, but you can do the very thing, the very most important thing that Elijah did was mentor somebody else. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Who will be your legacy? Who will be your legacy? I know if you have kids, they're going to be your legacy, and we need to invest in our kids, but I'm telling you, as someone who has children, my kids need more than just me to mentor them. They need other adults in this church to come alongside them and mentor them as well. And we'll talk more about that next week as we talk about investing in the next generation. But would you pray about this? If you don't even know where to start, would you come talk to me, or would you talk to Sarah at beartownroad.org, and just say, I need a mentor. I don't even know where to start. And we can help you find somebody. We can walk you through this process. Because what could be more important than leaving a legacy and mentoring people and showing them the ropes and helping them think through their sophisticated problems in life. Look, we can't give them everything, but we can give them something. So don't let those valleys and those mountaintop experiences go to waste. Invest in the lives of just one person. Andy Stanley says, do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Just one person. What if we as a church took this seriously and began to develop a culture of mentoring? It would change our church, and it would change the community. So let's do this. Let's do this. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up right now. We're going to close with a song as we leave this place, making a commitment to following God at all costs. But before we do, let's say a prayer together. God, when we read biblical accounts like that of Elijah and Elisha, it is engaging, and it is interesting, and it's amazing, and it's powerful. But at times, we think, well, yeah, that was, 2,900 years ago, and I'm not sure God still does that today. But the reality is, God, Elijah's work in mentoring Elisha was the most important thing that he did. We know that it will never go perfectly. Even Jesus mentored Judas, who betrayed him. Even Elisha mentored Gehazi, who was a dishonest person. That life is full of mountaintop experiences and also full of valleys. But God, you want to use all those different experiences to help mentor other people. I thank you for the people in our lives. I thank you for the way Rich Grassel invested and mentored in me so long ago. I thank you for the people who have invested so much time in many of us, and I pray that we would reciprocate it, that we would pass it on to just one other person, that you would bring to mind who that person could be. We pray this in the matchless, the amazing, the powerful name of the God of Elijah and Elisha and the God of Beartown Road Alliance Church. Amen. Amen. Let's stand together and sing this song to the Lord.
Before we sing,